The call came at 3:17 in the morning, dragging Jim Calloway from a dreamless sleep into the harsh reality of his cramped apartment in New Seattle. The soft blue glow of the communicator pulsed insistently, casting shadows across the stacks of medical journals and half-assembled nanite injectors that cluttered his desk. "Calloway," he mumbled, rubbing the stubble on his jaw as the holographic display flickered to life. The stern face of Ambassador Yoshida materialized, her expression as unreadable as ever. "Commander Calloway, your expertise is required." Jim winced at the title. It had been 2 years since anyone had called him commander. 2 years since the court-martial. 2 years since his decision to use experimental nanite therapy had saved 37 soldiers and ended his career. "It's just Jim now, Ambassador. What can a disgraced medic do for the United Earth government at this hour?" Yoshida's eyes narrowed. "This isn't UEG business, Calloway. This is delicate. A Zetheran royal transport arrived in orbit 3 hours ago. There was an incident during the diplomatic reception. An explosion." Jim straightened, instantly alert. The Zetherans, humanity's first and most powerful alien allies, were notoriously private about their royal family. Contact with them was strictly regulated. "The princess is wounded," Yoshida continued. "Severely. Their physicians can't stabilize her, and they're refusing to let our medical teams approach." "Why me?" Jim asked, though he already knew the answer. His work with nanite therapy had made him both famous and infamous in equal measure. "Because you're the best trauma surgeon we have, and because you have nothing to lose." Yoshida's voice softened almost imperceptibly. "And because Queen Zara personally requested you. She's aware of your methods." Jim's laugh was hollow. "The same methods that got me court-martialed? The same methods that saved 37 lives when conventional medicine failed," Yoshida countered. "A shuttle is waiting at Terminal 3. You have 1 hour to gather your equipment." The communication ended, leaving Jim alone in the blue glow. He stared at his reflection in the darkened window, the shadows under his eyes, the premature gray in his hair, and wondered if this was redemption or simply another way to fall. 58 minutes later, Jim stood on the landing pad, a duffel bag containing his portable nanite sequencer slung over his shoulder. The wind whipped around him, carrying the scent of rain and ozone as the shuttle descended its engines, burning bright against the night sky. Ambassador Yoshida waited at the foot of the ramp, her posture rigid. "Do you understand what's at stake, Calloway?" Jim nodded. "If the princess dies, relations between Earth and the Zetheran Empire collapse." "Worse," Yoshida said quietly. "If Princess Allura dies while under human care, we face war. The Zetheran military has been looking for an excuse to abandon the peace treaty since it was signed." "No pressure, then," Jim muttered, adjusting the strap of his bag. Yoshida's hand shot out, gripping his arm with surprising strength. "Listen to me, Calloway. This isn't just about saving one life. This is about saving millions. Whatever you do up there, whatever rules you have to break, make sure she survives." The journey to the Zetheran vessel took less than 30 minutes, but to Jim, it felt like hours. He spent the time reviewing the limited medical data on Zetheran physiology that had been made available to human scientists. Their blood was copper-based rather than iron, their neural pathways more distributed than centralized. They healed faster than humans, but were vulnerable to different toxins. The Zetheran ship loomed ahead, a massive organic-looking structure that seemed more grown than built. Its hull gleamed with an iridescent sheen that reminded Jim of beetle shells. "We call it the Beast," the shuttle pilot remarked as they approached. "Nobody knows if it's actually alive or just designed to look that way." The docking procedure was tense, with the Zetheran vessel maintaining communication silence until the final moment. When the airlock cycled open, Jim was met by a delegation of 3 Zetherans, their tall, slender forms encased in what appeared to be living armor. The lead Zetheran stepped forward. He stood over 7 feet tall, with skin the color of burnished bronze and eyes like liquid mercury. "I am Toval, commander of the Royal Guard. You will follow me, human. Touch nothing. Speak only when addressed. Jim nodded, clutching his medical bag tighter. The corridors of the Zetheran ship pulsed with subtle light, the walls curved and seamless, giving the unsettling impression of walking through the interior of some enormous creature. The air was thick with a sweet metallic scent that made Jim's head swim. They passed several chambers where Zetheran crew members worked at consoles that seemed to grow out of the walls. Each crew member paused to stare as Jim passed their expressions unreadable to human eyes. Finally, they arrived at what appeared to be the medical bay. Unlike the sterile, gleaming facilities, Jim was accustomed to. This room was bathed in amber light with surfaces that seemed to ripple and shift subtly. In the center lay a figure on a raised platform surrounded by concerned Zetheran attendants. "This is Jav, the royal physician," Toval announced, gesturing to an older Zetheran whose armor was adorned with spiraling patterns. "He will observe your work." Jav stepped forward, his mercury eyes narrowed with suspicion. "I have studied your human medicine," he said, his voice carrying a melodic undertone that all Zetherans seemed to share. "It is primitive, invasive. You cut where you should coax. You poison where you should purify." Jim met the alien's gaze steadily. "With respect, if your methods were working, I wouldn't be here." Jav's face twisted in what might have been a grimace. "The princess's injuries are beyond our experience. The blast contained elements designed to disrupt our healing processes." "Let me see her," Jim said, already moving toward the central platform. Princess Alora lay still, her copper-toned skin ashen, her breathing shallow. She was younger than Jim had expected, perhaps the equivalent of a human in their early 20s. Unlike the other Zetherans, whose bodies were angular and severe, the princess possessed a fluid grace, even in unconsciousness. A complex pattern of ridges adorned her forehead and swept back along her scalp, in place of hair, a sign of royal lineage Jim recalled from his briefings. What struck him most, however, were the wounds. Angry, purple lesions spread across her exposed skin, pulsating with an unnatural light. Whatever had caused them was still active, still destroying tissue. "How long has she been like this?" Jim asked, opening his bag and removing a handheld scanner. 14 of your Earth hours," Jav replied. "The damage spreads. Our healing chambers have no effect." Jim ran the scanner over the princess's body, frowning at the readings. "These lesions are generating some kind of electromagnetic field that's disrupting her cellular cohesion. It's almost like what human Toval demanded. Like they were specifically designed to kill Zetherans," Jim finished quietly. "This wasn't a random attack. Someone knew exactly what they were doing." Jim reached into his bag and removed the nanite sequencer, a sleek device that hummed softly as it powered up. Jav stepped forward, alarm evident in his stance. "What is that device?" "It's a medical nanite sequencer," Jim explained, already calibrating the settings. "It generates microscopic robots programmed to repair cellular damage. They'll identify the source of the disruption and neutralize it." "Abomination," Jav hissed. "You would put machines inside the body of our princess. This violates all sacred principles of healing." Jim continued working his fingers, moving swiftly across the sequencer's interface. "Your sacred principles are watching her die. My abomination might save her." Toval's hand moved to the weapon at his side. "The Queen authorized conventional treatment only. These machines were not discussed." "Then contact the Queen," Jim said, not looking up. "But do it quickly. Your princess has maybe 6 hours before the damage becomes irreversible." A tense silence fell over the medical bay. Jim could feel the weight of the Zetheran's stares, the mixture of desperation and distrust. Finally, Toval activated a communication device embedded in his armor. The exchange that followed was in the Zetheran language, too rapid for Jim to follow, with his limited knowledge. It ended with Toval turning to Jim, his expression grave. "The Queen has granted permission," he said stiffly. "But with conditions. You have 6 hours to show improvement in the princess's condition. If you fail..." He left the threat unspoken. Jim nodded, returning his attention to the princess. I'll need space to work. And I need all your data on the explosion residue analysis, surveillance footage, everything. The investigation is ongoing, Toval hedged. This isn't just about medicine anymore, Jim insisted. Someone tried to assassinate your princess with a weapon specifically designed to kill Zetherans. I need to know what I'm fighting against. Reluctantly, Toval gestured to one of his subordinates, who approached with a data cube. This contains all current findings. Use it well, human. Jim inserted the cube into his scanner, quickly reviewing the information as he prepared the nanite injection. The explosion had occurred during a ceremonial toast at the diplomatic reception. The device had been hidden in a decorative sculpture, timed to detonate when the princess approached. The nanite solution glowed faintly blue in the injector, as Jim held it up to the light, checking for impurities. Each nanite was smaller than a human cell, programmed with parameters specific to Zetheran physiology, a modification Jim had been working on in secret since the first contact. This will take time, Jim warned, positioning the injector against the princess's neck, where the Zetheran equivalent of a carotid artery pulsed weakly. The nanites need to map her system before they can begin repairs. 6 hours, human, Toval reminded him coldly. Not a minute more. Jim depressed the trigger, watching as the blue solution disappeared into the princess's copper skin. A monitoring interface unfolded from his sequencer, displaying the nanite's progress. In real time, thousands of tiny lights spreading through the princess's circulatory system, gathering data, analyzing the damage. Now came the waiting. Jim settled into a chair beside the princess, eyes fixed on the monitor. Behind him, he could hear the Zetherans murmuring among themselves, their musical language laced with what sounded like worry and doubt. 4 hours passed with agonizing slowness. The nanites had mapped the princess's entire system and identified the foreign agent causing the disruption, a synthetic compound that attacked the copper in Zetheran blood, turning it against the body's own tissues. They had begun neutralizing it, but progress was slow. Jim's communicator chimed softly. A message from Dr. Patel, his former research partner back on Earth, who was analyzing the data he'd sent. Jim, this compound isn't just toxic, it's adaptive. The molecular structure shifts to resist neutralization. Your standard protocols won't work fast enough. You need to modify the nanites to target the compound's quaternary structure. Jim's fingers flew across the sequencer interface, implementing the changes. The monitor showed the nanites reconfiguring, adapting to the new instructions. The spread of the lesions slowed, then stopped. A soft gasp from the Zetheran attendants made Jim look up. Princess Alora's eyes had opened, eyes, the color of molten silver, now fixed directly on him. Before Jim could speak, the princess's hand shot out with inhuman speed, closing around his throat. Her grip was like iron, cutting off his air as she pulled him close. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice a rasp. "What poison have you put in me, human?" Jim couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. He pointed weakly to the sequencer still displaying the nanite's progress. Toval was there in an instant, speaking rapidly in Zetheran. The princess's grip loosened slightly, allowing Jim to drag in a painful breath. "Not poison," he gasped. "Medicine, nanites, healing you." The princess's eyes narrowed, but she released him, sinking back onto the platform. "Explain," she commanded. Jim rubbed his throat, coughing. "You were attacked. The explosion released a compound designed to destroy Zetheran tissue. My nanites are neutralizing it and repairing the damage. Machines inside me." The princess looked to Jav, who nodded reluctantly. "The Queen approved this treatment, Your Highness. The humans' methods, while unorthodox, appear to be effective." Alora turned her silver gaze back to Jim, studying him with unsettling intensity. "You do not fear me," she observed, "even as I held your life in my hand. Why?" Jim met her gaze steadily. "I'm more concerned with saving your life than fearing for my own." A strange expression crossed the princess's face, something almost like respect. "What is your name, human healer?" "Jim Calloway." Jim Calloway." She repeated the name, sounding exotic in her musical accent. You are the first being to touch me without causing pain in 14 hours. For that alone, I am in your debt." The monitoring interface beeped, drawing Jim's attention. The nanites had neutralized 60% of the toxic compound. The princess's vital signs were stabilizing, the lesions beginning to fade. "The treatment is working," Jim announced, relief evident in his voice. "Another few hours, and you should be able to move without pain. Full recovery will take longer." "How long until I can stand fight?" Alora asked, already attempting to sit up. Jim placed a hand on her shoulder, gently restraining her, an action that caused the Zetheran guards to tense visibly. "Your Highness, you need to rest. The nanites are still working." To everyone's surprise, the princess settled back, yielding to his touch. "Very well, Jim Calloway. I will rest. But you will stay and tell me of Earth. I have studied your world, but never visited." Jim glanced at Toval, who nodded reluctantly. "As you wish, Your Highness." As the hours passed, Jim found himself engaged in conversation with the alien princess. He described the rebuilt cities of Earth, the reclaimed wilderness zones, the underwater habitats. Alora listened with evident fascination, asking pointed questions that revealed a keen intelligence. In turn, she told him of Zetheria, the Zetheran homeworld, a place of towering crystal formations and vast underground rivers. She spoke of her training as both diplomat and warrior, as was tradition for Zetheran royalty. "We believe that those who negotiate peace must understand the cost of war," she explained. "I earned these markings in combat." She traced the ridges on her forehead, which Jim now realized were akin to battle scars deliberately enhanced to form patterns of status. As they talked, Jim continued to monitor the nanites' progress. By the 5th hour, the toxic compound had been neutralized, and the lesions had faded to faint outlines on the princess's copper skin. "You have fulfilled your bargain, human," Toval acknowledged grudgingly. "The princess lives." Jim nodded, but his expression remained troubled. "The treatment was successful, but we still don't know who was behind the attack." Alora sat up, moving carefully, but with growing confidence. "It was clearly meant to seem like a human attack, to sabotage the Alliance. But the compound was specifically designed to affect Zetheran physiology," Jim pointed out. "That suggests detailed knowledge that few humans possess." The princess's eyes narrowed. "You suspect a Zetheran was involved?" "I think we need more information," Jim hedged, conscious of the tension radiating from Toval and the other guards. Jim's communicator chimed again. Another message from Dr. Patel. "Jim, I've completed the molecular analysis. The compound contains trace elements only found on Zetheria. This was definitely not human-made." Jim looked up to find Alora watching him intently. "What is it?" she demanded. "The compound that poisoned you contains elements only found on your homeworld," Jim said quietly. "This wasn't a human attack disguised as Zetheran. It was a Zetheran attack disguised as human." The revelation fell, like a stone into still water, sending ripples of tension through the medical bay. Toval stepped forward, his hand moving to his weapon. "You accuse us of attacking our own princess." "Not all of you," Jim clarified. "But someone with access to Zetheran technology and materials." Alora's expression hardened. "There has been opposition to the alliance within the royal court. Traditionalists who believe contact with other species weakens us." Her eyes found Toval's. "General Krav has been vocal in the military council." Toval's posture stiffened. "Your Highness, to suggest that a high-ranking military officer would what commander attempt to sabotage a peace he has publicly denounced, create an incident that would lead to war with the humans?" Alora's voice was cold. "We must contact my mother immediately." Jim began gathering his equipment, sensing that his role in this political drama was coming to an end. But as he reached for the sequencer, the lights in the medical bay suddenly dimmed, plunging the room into eerie half-darkness. A klaxon sounded its wailing cry echoing through the corridors of the ship. Toval activated his communicator, barking commands in Zetheran. The response seemed to alarm him. "What's happening?" Jim demanded. Communications have been cut, Toval replied tersely. There are reports of armed conflict in multiple sections of the ship. Krav. Alora spat the name like a curse. He moves against us openly now. The door to the medical bay slid open, revealing a squad of Zetheran soldiers in armor, distinct from the Royal Guard's darker, with red accents. They raised weapons that pulsed with the same purple energy Jim had seen in the princess's wounds. "Protect the princess!" Toval shouted, drawing his own weapon as chaos erupted in the confined space. Jim dove for cover behind the medical platform, pulling Alora with him as energy blasts sizzled through the air, leaving scorch marks on the organic walls. The princess moved with surprising agility despite her recent injuries, her eyes alight with battle fervor. "We need weapons," she hissed. Jim pointed to a panel on the wall where Jav had stored various medical implements. "There. Can any of those be used to fight?" Alora's lips curved in what might have been a smile. "Zetheran surgical tools are not so different from weapons." She darted forward, keeping low, and returned with two gleaming instruments that resembled curved daggers. The firefight intensified. Two of Toval's guards fell, their armor smoking from direct hits. Jav crouched behind a console, attempting to activate emergency protocols to seal the medical bay. "We need to get you to your mother," Jim said, ducking, as an energy blast passed inches above his head. "If Krav controls communications, he'll tell her whatever story suits his purposes." "Agreed," Alora nodded grimly. "But first we must survive this assault." She pressed one of the surgical daggers into Jim's hand. "Do you know how to use this healer?" Jim grimaced. "I usually use my tools to save lives, not take them. Today you may need to do both." A sudden explosion rocked the entrance to the medical bay, filling the air with smoke and debris. Through the haze, more rebel soldiers poured in, overwhelming Toval's remaining guards. The commander himself fought with grim determination, his weapon cutting down 3 attackers before a blast caught him in the shoulder, spinning him to the ground. "We need another way out," Jim muttered, scanning the room desperately. Alora pointed to a section of wall behind Jav's workstation. "Maintenance access. It leads to the secondary command deck." "Can you move that fast?" Jim asked, eyeing the princess with concern. The nanites had repaired much of the damage, but she was still recovering. Alora's silver eyes flashed. "I am Zetheran royalty Jim Calloway. We do not show weakness." Together, they made a dash for the access panel, Jim's sequencer clutched in one hand, the surgical dagger in the other. Jav saw their intention and moved to cover them, using a medical scanner as an improvised shield. The panel slid open at Alora's touch, revealing a narrow tunnel that seemed to be composed of the same organic material as the rest of the ship. Jim followed the princess into the confined space, the panel sealing behind them, just as a barrage of energy blasts struck where they had been standing. The tunnel was dimly lit by bioluminescent strips that pulsed like heartbeats. They crawled swiftly, Alora leading the way, with confident turns at various junctions. "How far to the command deck?" Jim whispered. "Not far, but it will be heavily guarded if Krav is truly attempting a coup." Alora replied, her voice tight with controlled fury. "When we arrive, stay close to me. Zetheran politics can be lethal." They emerged from the maintenance tunnel into a corridor bustling with activity. Zetheran crew members rushed past, some bearing weapons, others carrying injured comrades. None paid attention to Jim, and Alora pressed against the wall in the shadows. "The command deck is through those doors," Alora murmured, indicating a set of massive portals at the end of the corridor. "But we cannot simply walk in." Jim studied the chaos around them, an idea forming. "What about the ship's communications? Is there a way to bypass the main systems?" Alora's eyes widened slightly. "The emergency beacon. It transmits directly to the royal flagship, impossible to block, without shutting down the ship's core." "Where is it?" "This way." They moved through the corridors, using the confusion of the coup attempt as cover. Twice, they were forced to hide as patrols of Krav's soldiers passed. Once, they had to fight a brief, brutal encounter in a darkened storage chamber that left Jim with a painful energy burn across his ribs and a rebel soldier unconscious on the deck. The emergency beacon was housed in a small chamber near the ship's outer hull. The room was unguarded, Krav's forces apparently unaware of its significance. "Cover the door," Allura instructed, moving to the beacon controls. "This will take precision." Jim positioned himself at the entrance, watching the corridor outside through a narrow gap. His side throbbed where the energy blast had caught him, the pain intensifying with each breath. "Whatever you're doing, do it quickly," he urged, hearing the sound of approaching footsteps. Allura's fingers danced across the control interface, inputting complex sequences. "A direct message to my mother cannot be intercepted or altered. I am including the data from your nanites as proof of the assassination attempt." The beacon hummed to life, emitting a soft blue glow as it powered up. A status indicator showed the message transmitting a secure quantum burst that would reach the royal flagship in seconds. "It's done," Allura announced, turning back to Jim. Her expression changed to one of alarm. "You're injured." Jim grimaced, pressing a hand to his side. "It's nothing. We need to move." "Let me see," Allura insisted, brushing his hand aside. The wound was an angry red welt, the skin around it blistering. "This is a corrosive energy burn. Without treatment, it will continue to damage tissue." Before Jim could protest, she removed a small vial from her belt, a container of shimmering liquid that caught the light like quicksilver. "Royal healing serum," she explained, applying the liquid to his wound. The pain subsided immediately, replaced by a cooling sensation. "It will stabilize the injury, but proper treatment will be required later." "Thank you," Jim said, surprised by the gesture. "But we should—" The door slid open, suddenly revealing a squad of rebel soldiers, led by a tall, imposing Zetheran, whose armor bore elaborate insignia of rank. "General Krav, I presume," Jim said grimly, raising the surgical dagger. The general's mercury eyes flicked dismissively over Jim before fixing on Allura. "Princess, you disappoint me. Consorting with humans, allowing their machines into your body. Your mother's weakness runs deep in your blood." "The only weakness here is yours, Krav," Allura replied, her voice regal, despite their precarious position. "Attacking your own princess, rather than facing me in honorable combat." Krav's expression twisted in disdain. "Honor. What honor is there in alliance with lesser species? The humans should be conquered, not consulted." "We've sent a message to the royal flagship," Jim interjected. "Your coup has failed." Krav laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "A message to a ship that will soon be under my command as well. The royal guard is loyal to the throne, but the military follows me." He gestured, and his soldiers raised their weapons. "The princess will come with us. The human is unnecessary." Jim moved to stand between Allura and the weapons, his mind racing for a way out of their predicament. The surgical dagger seemed woefully inadequate against energy weapons, but it was all he had. "If you harm him, you prove everything I have said about your kind," Allura declared, stepping up beside Jim, rather than behind him. "That you fear what you do not understand. That you destroy rather than learn." A tension-filled silence stretched between them. Then, without warning, alarms blared throughout the ship, a different pattern from before. "What is that?" Jim asked, not taking his eyes off Krav. Allura's lips curved in a triumphant smile. "The royal flagship has arrived. My mother comes." Krav's face contorted with rage. He raised his weapon, aiming directly at Jim. "Then, she can witness the consequences of human interference." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. As Krav fired, Allura shoved Jim aside, the energy blast grazing her shoulder instead of striking him full in the chest. She staggered but remained standing, her own surgical dagger flying from her hand with deadly accuracy to embed itself in Krav's throat. The general dropped his weapon, hands clutching at the blade, as he collapsed to his knees. His soldiers hesitated, confused by the sudden turn of events and the blaring alarms signaling the arrival of the Queen. "Surrender," Allura commanded, her voice carrying the full weight of royal authority despite her injury. "Or face execution for treason against the throne." One by one, the soldiers lowered their weapons. In the distance, Jim could hear the sounds of fighting subsiding as news of the Queen's arrival spread throughout the ship. "Are you all right?" he asked Alora, concerned by the injury to her shoulder. She nodded tersely. "A minor wound. Your nanites are already repairing the damage." She glanced at him with something like respect. "You placed yourself between me and certain death, Jim Calloway. Few would show such courage." "I am a doctor," Jim replied simply. "Protecting lives is what I do." Royal guards flooded into the chamber, securing Krav's soldiers and attending to the fallen general who still lived despite his wound. Toval was among them, his earlier injury bandaged, but his presence formidable as ever. "The ship is secure, Your Highness," he reported. "The Queen awaits you in the throne room." Jim followed as Alora was escorted through the corridors of the now subdued vessel. The damage from the brief but intense conflict was evident everywhere: scorch marks on the walls, injured crew members being treated, rebel soldiers under guard. The throne room was a vast chamber at the heart of the ship, its ceiling arching high overhead, like the interior of a cathedral. Living crystal formations grew from the walls, catching and refracting light in mesmerizing patterns. At the center, on a raised dais, sat Queen Zara of the Zetheran Empire. Jim had seen images of the Queen before, but nothing had prepared him for her actual presence. She was Alora, magnified taller, her copper skin gleaming with a subtle iridescence, the ridge patterns on her forehead and scalp more elaborate and extending down her neck and arms. Her eyes were not silver, but gold-piercing in their intensity. Alora approached the dais and knelt, a gesture of respect rather than subservience. "Mother, I bring you both treachery and loyalty." Queen Zara's gaze moved from her daughter to Jim, who stood awkwardly at the edge of the Royal Guard formation, acutely aware of his disheveled appearance and the dried blood on his medical uniform. "Jim Calloway." The Queen's voice resonated through the chamber, musical, yet commanding. "Step forward." Jim complied, approaching the dais and offering what he hoped was an acceptable bow. "You healed my daughter with your forbidden machines," the Queen stated, her tone neutral. "I did, Your Majesty." "And then you fought to protect her against her own kind." Jim nodded. "I did what was necessary." The Queen's golden eyes studied him for a long moment. "Dr. Patel sends her regards." Jim blinked in surprise. "You know Dr. Patel?" A smile touched the Queen's lips. "Who do you think suggested you for this task? Your work with nanite therapy has not gone unnoticed even beyond Earth." Jim's mind reeled with the implications. "Then the court-martial my disgrace." "Politics," Queen Zara said dismissively. "Your government needed a scapegoat when the nanite program proved controversial, but they were wise enough not to imprison their most brilliant medical mind." The Queen rose from her throne, towering over Jim. "Now you stand before me injured in defense of my daughter. The debt is clear." She turned to Alora. "Daughter, what would you ask for this human who has twice saved your life?" Alora straightened, meeting her mother's gaze. "I would ask that he be allowed to use his healing machines on himself. His wound worsens even as we speak." Jim glanced down in surprise. The energy burn on his side had indeed spread, the royal healing serum no longer containing it. The pain he'd been suppressing suddenly flared, causing him to sway on his feet. "The weapons Krav's forces used," Toval explained quietly. "They were designed to overcome Zetheran healing abilities. The serum was only a temporary measure." Queen Zara considered for a moment, then nodded. "So be it. Though it violates our traditions, we will allow the human to use his machines on himself in recognition of his service to the crown." Jim fumbled for his sequencer, but his vision was already blurring at the edges, the pain intensifying as he struggled to remain standing. "Allow me," Alora said, taking the device from his trembling hands. "You showed me how it works." With surprising gentleness, the Zetheran princess guided Jim to a seat at the base of the dais. She activated the sequencer with confident movements, preparing a nanite injection with the same precision Jim had demonstrated earlier. "This will hurt," she warned, positioning the injector against his neck. Jim managed a weak smile. "I trust you," The nanites flooded his system cold at first, then burning as they mapped the damage and began repairs. Jim's consciousness wavered, the throne room fading in and out of focus, as the microscopic machines fought to neutralize the corrosive energy that was eating away at his tissues. Through the haze of pain, he heard Queen Zara speaking her melodic voice, seeming to come from far away. The human has proven the value of sharing knowledge across species. Perhaps there is wisdom in the alliance after all. Alora's voice replied closer, her hand steady on his shoulder. He shows what humans are capable of at their best, mother. Courage, ingenuity, compassion. Then, perhaps he is not just the savior of my daughter, but of the alliance itself, the Queen mused. When he recovers, we will speak of a new role for Jim Calloway, a bridge between our peoples. Darkness claimed Jim then, the nanites' work pulling him into unconsciousness, as they rebuilt damaged tissue cell by cell. His last thought was that redemption had come in a form he never could have imagined. 2 years later, Jim stood on the observation deck of the royal flagship, Zetheria's Pride, watching as Earth grew larger in the view screen. Beside him, Alora, now Ambassador Alora to the human colonies, adjusted the formal diplomatic sash that crossed her copper-toned armor. Nervous? Jim asked, noting the way she fidgeted with the ceremonial dagger at her belt. Alora's silver eyes flashed with amusement. Zetheran royalty does not get nervous, Jim Calloway. Of course not, he agreed, hiding a smile. Just as human medical advisors don't get airsick on Zetheran ships. The past 2 years had transformed both their lives. Jim had been appointed head of interspecies medical research, overseeing the regulated implementation of nanite therapy for both humans and Zetherans. His disgrace had been officially erased from military records, replaced by commendations for his role in preserving the alliance. Alora had ascended to a new position within the Zetheran hierarchy, still a warrior princess, but now also the primary diplomatic liaison to humanity. Together, they had become the living symbols of what cooperation between species could achieve. The nanite program had expanded dramatically, saving countless lives on both sides. Zetheran healing techniques had been adapted for human use, while human technological innovations had been integrated into Zetheran society. It was an exchange that benefited both civilizations, though not without resistance from traditionalists. The Queen's Council still debates whether I've become too human, Alora remarked, reading his thoughts, with the uncanny perception she'd always possessed. And I've heard whispers that you've gone native among your own people. Jim shrugged. People fear what they don't understand, but the results speak for themselves. He gestured to a passing Zetheran medical officer, whose armor bore the distinctive blue spiral that identified graduates of the Joint Medical Academy. 3 years ago, the idea of Zetherans using nanites would have been unthinkable. Now they're standard emergency protocol. And humans learning Zetheran battle meditation techniques. Alora countered with a raised eyebrow ridge. Your military commanders were equally skeptical. Until they saw the improved recovery rates for PTSD, Jim acknowledged. Medicine knows no species in the end. A comfortable silence fell between them, as Earth continued to grow in the view screen, its blue-green surface swirled with white clouds. Jim hadn't been home in nearly 6 months, his duties keeping him primarily on Zetheria, or aboard the diplomatic fleet. Your family will be at the ceremony, Alora asked quietly. Jim nodded. My sister and her kids. They're excited to meet you. He hesitated. I should warn you, my nephew is obsessed with Zetheran battle techniques. He might ask for a demonstration. Alora's lips curved in a smile. I would be honored, as long as your niece doesn't ask me to braid her hair again. Human hair is challenging. Jim laughed, remembering the video call where his niece had proudly displayed the rather unique hairstyle Alora had attempted during their last visit. No promises. A soft chime announced the arrival of Queen Zara on the observation deck. Jim and Alora turned, offering respectful bows to the Zetheran monarch. Mother, Alora greeted. We did not expect you until the approach to Earth orbit. Queen Zara moved to join them at the view screen, her golden eyes reflecting the blue-green of Earth. "I wish to speak with both of you before the formalities begin." Over the past 2 years, Jim had grown more accustomed to the Queen's presence, though she still carried an aura of authority that commanded respect. Her acceptance of him had paved the way for greater integration between human and Zetheran research teams, her royal decree overriding centuries of tradition. "The Zetheran High Council has approved the next phase of the medical exchange program," the Queen announced, including the establishment of a permanent research facility in the new Seattle Medical District. Jim couldn't hide his surprise. "That's unexpected. The conservative faction has been blocking that proposal for months." "They were persuaded," Queen Zara said simply, though the slight curve of her lips suggested the persuasion had been significant. "The success of the nanite therapies in treating genetic disorders among our youth was compelling." What went unsaid was the personal stake the Queen had in the program. Her youngest child, born after the alliance was formed, had been saved by a combination of nanite therapy and traditional Zetheran healing techniques when a genetic disorder had threatened the infant's life. "There is another matter," the Queen continued, her tone shifting subtly. "The ritual of Zavora." Jim glanced at Alora, whose copper skin had darkened slightly in what he now recognized as the Zetheran equivalent of a blush. "Mother, we discussed this," Alora said, her voice low. "The timing—" "The timing is perfect," Queen Zara interrupted gently. "The alliance anniversary. Representatives from both worlds in attendance. What better occasion to announce the first diplomatic union between our species?" Jim felt heat rising in his own cheeks. The relationship between him and Alora had evolved gradually from professional respect to friendship to something deeper. While not a secret, they had kept it relatively private, aware of the political implications. "Your Majesty," Jim began carefully, "while I am honored beyond words, I'm concerned about the reaction from both sides. There are still those who oppose the alliance who would see this as exactly what it is," the Queen cut in. "The natural progression of our people's journey together." Her golden eyes softened as she looked between them. "My daughter has chosen Jim Calloway. The question is, have you?" Jim met Alora's silver gaze, reading the question there, and the vulnerability beneath her warrior's exterior. Their worlds were different in countless ways, their biologies distinct, their cultures often at odds. But in the spaces between those differences, they had found something rare and precious. "I chose long ago," Jim said quietly. "When I stood between her and Krav's weapon. I just didn't know it yet." Alora's hand found his, her copper fingers intertwining with his pale ones. "As did I, when I allowed your machines into my blood. We have been joined since that day in ways neither of our peoples fully understand." Queen Zara nodded satisfaction, evident in her expression. "Then it is settled. The Zavora ceremony will be announced at the conclusion of the Alliance commemoration." As the Queen departed, Jim turned to Alora, still processing the implications. "Zavora. That's the Zetheran bonding ritual like marriage." "Similar, but more profound," Alora explained. "It is a binding not just of lives, but of lineages. In the old days it was used to unite warring clans." "So I'm marrying into Zetheran royalty," Jim said with a slightly dazed laugh. "My sister is going to have a field day with this." Alora's expression grew serious. "It means more than that, Jim. The children of Zavora are considered blessed by the ancestors destined for greatness." Jim blinked. "Children, is that even possible between us?" "With the advancements in genetic compatibility research," Alora shrugged. "The scientists say yes, though it would require significant assistance. But that is a discussion for another day." Her silver eyes held his. "The question now is, do you accept the Zavora? It cannot be undone." Jim looked out at Earth growing ever larger in the view screen, then back to the extraordinary being beside him, warrior princess diplomat healer in her own right. The woman who had saved his life as surely as he had saved hers. "2 years ago I was a disgraced medic with nothing to lose," he said softly. Now I have everything to gain. He raised their joined hands. Yes, I accept the Zavora. Whatever comes, we face it together. Alora's smile was radiant. As the ancient Zetheran vow says, 2 bloods, 1 pulse. 2 worlds, 1 future, Jim added, creating his own counterpart to the vow. As Earth's orbital stations came into view, their lights gleaming against the darkness of space, Jim felt a profound sense of rightness. He had crossed the void between worlds to save a wounded princess, and found not just redemption, but a new purpose, a new home that existed in the space between species. The royal flagship began its docking sequence, humanity's greatest space station growing larger in the view screen. On the observation deck below, dignitaries from both worlds gathered, unaware of the announcement that would soon reshape their understanding of what alliance truly meant. "Ready to make history again?" Jim asked, offering his arm in the formal Zetheran manner. Alora took at her copper skin gleaming against his uniform. "With you, Jim Calloway, always." Together, they moved toward the ceremonial chamber where Earth's representatives waited to welcome the Zetheran delegation. Behind them, the stars stretched into infinity, witness to an alliance that had begun with a wounded princess and a human medic with nothing to lose, and had become the foundation for a future neither world could have imagined alone.